Welcome back, everybody, to the ISL report. What a great week we are now. 3 weeks in, the league is off and running. The early storylines have begun to emerge, and this is the place to have them broken down all season long. First of all, thank you for all the feedback on the first recap report. We're hoping to improve this and cater it to anyone who either can't catch the stream for some reason or watched it and want to dive deeper into the glory that is the ISL. We all know no one sounds as smooth as Systems, and I make no claims that I am, but I am definitely not a bot, and I do love the ISL and numbers and stats and trends, and would probably win both season-long contests if I wasn't going to give you all my secrets here each week. Hopefully, as the season goes on, we can get Systems himself on here for a regular 10 to 15 minute segment after the individual game recaps to give his take on the action. But in the meantime, keep the suggestions coming, and thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video and the YouTube itself. Of course, the best way to stay up to date with the ISL is to watch it live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can do this in two different places. The first is at kick.com/systems, and the second is at isl.bet. Speaking of isl.bet, that's the home of the ISL itself. It's where you can see the matchups, the standings, you can make your picks, set your lineup, and get in on the action. Sign up is free and open to everyone. Just create an account, verify your email address, and win. There's no affiliate code needed. There's no casino account required. You don't even need to be following or watching Systems. Just create an account at isl.bet, make your picks, and set your fantasy lineup each week. Weekly and season-long prizes total $40,000 for season 1, and Systems has a standing reward of $1,000 to the first person to go 16-0 in weekly picks. So get those picks in for week 4 today after you get the inside scoop here with me. The early leaders in the ASC include the powerhouses out of the ASC East, Silverback, Multiplier Mountain, and Rich Raptor. Surprise early contender Bloodsuckers Megaways joins ASC South pair Kodiak Kingdom and Mental to round out the undefeateds as we headed into week 3. The ISC is headed up by the eternal Gates of Olympus, Fantasy Darlings, Hip Hop Pop, and Dragonfall, and the shocker of the season so far at 2-0, Wild Coyote Megawave. Remember, Pick'em is only half of the ISL weekly and long prize pool. The fantasy game is just as fun and free to play. You just pick the 5 slots that you think will do the best given the scoring system. Each game win in the best of 5 matches worth 1 point, and a match win worth an additional 3 points. If a slot wins the first 3 games in a row, it's called a sweep, and they net an additional 2 points for their manager. Each slot can earn an extra point for each buy over 1x, 2 points if it's over 3x, 4 points if it's over 10x, and 25 points for a max win. Picking wrong can hurt you though, as a slot loses half a point for any buy under 0.1x, 2 full points for a 0x, and 1 point if they are swept. Now, let's get into the week 3 action. First up was matchup number 1, Big Bamboo of Push Gaming versus Sweet Bonanza from Pragmatic. Both come in at 1-1 after getting off to hot starts week 1, but dropping matchups last week. Sweet in a big upset against Grand Heist, and Bamboo in a 5-game match versus Mental. It was an incredible back and forth matchup that got week 3 off to an amazing start. Sweet Bonanza jumped off to a quick start in game 1, but then was quickly down 2-1 after our first golden coins of the ISL for Big Bamboo. Sweet was not done though, as she landed a 100x bomb in game 4 for a big 4.73x to force a game 5. Bamboo finished the job with a big screen of Poombas though in game 5 to finish the 3-2 win, move to 2-1, and net 7 fantasy points with the 6 for a win plus 1 over 1x. Sweet Bonanza falls to 1-2, scores 4 in the loss with 2 game wins and a 3x game. Matchup number 2 brings us Sweet Rush Megaways from B Gaming taking on Royal Potato from Print Studios. Both slots are also 1-1 after 2 weeks, and both had a 500 game winning percentage coming in. Of course, Royal Potato had that huge 11.09x last week in a thrilling 5-game win over Sheep's Gone Wild. Could they repeat the potato magic today? No, they could not. This was a brutal Sweet Rush sweep, with the potato having gone rotten. It falls to 1-2 with a 0.2x high, losing 1.5 fantasy points with a sub 0.1 0.1x and a sweep. Sweet Rush moves to 2-1 and adds 8 fantasy points with the win and sweep, but doesn't have any buys that profit. Matchup number 3 brings us the infamous Dr. Rock in the Riff Reactor from TrueLab Games and the undefeated Kodiak Kingdom coming out of the Games Global stable. On paper, this one should have not been close, with Dr. Rock's volatility leading it to an 0-2 record and Kodiak's consistency shining at 2-0, and that's exactly how it played out. Although Kodiak didn't get any buys over 1x, they moved to 3-0 and net 8 fantasy points with a thorough sweep. Dr. Rock did not have anything close to a blow up and actually had a sub 0.1x buy to pair with his sweep to lose his manager's 1.5 points and fall to 0-3 on the season. Matchup number 4 was the only slot that had not yet dropped a game, Silverback Multiplier Mountain from Games Global against 1-1 Space Wars 2 PowerPoints from NetEnt. Strength versus strength and length versus length here as two of the less volatile but longer spinning games matched up. And what a back and forth battle this one was. This one went to the tapes. A Silverback win, game 1, gave them 7 in a row on the season, but Space Wars tore back with 2 wins in a row to put the Silverback on the ropes, and then all hell broke loose. First, Systems jinxed the living world out of Space Wars, which loses game 4 by $4. But wait, did they actually lose game 4? After a lengthy discussion and VOD review, it was determined that the multi to 2 decimals is what matters, not who wins the dollar amount. And we re-rolled game 4, where Space Wars finished the job in a close 0.6 to 0.54 matchup. While I had Silverback in my picks and fantasy, I have to admit the final ruling was probably fair given what the VOD showed, and the move to 3 decimals next year will be welcomed, but the chat will remember this day like the tuck rule game in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken. After all of that, we had to go on to matchup number 5. It featured Systems' early Super Pull favorite Rich Raptors from Phantasma Games at 2-0 against big underdog from Quickspin and early disappointment Cabin Crashers. Another lopsided matchup on paper, as Cabin Crashers had been at the bottom of the actual and fantasy standings this year, while Rich Raptors has become an early favorite. This one provided a little more drama than expected though, as Cabin Crashers pulled off a big win in game 3 to stop the sweep and cause Rich Raptors fantasy fans angst with a big 1.91 against a putrid 0.05 for Raptors. The Dinos pulled off the win in game 4 though and moved to 3-0 with 5 fantasy points with that sub 0.1x. Cabin Crashers falls to 0-3 but puts up positive fantasy points for the first time all season with a game win and an over 1x buy. Matchup number 6 pitted Choco Reels from Wazdan against Rise of Atlantis from Blueprint. Buckle up folks, this was amazing. Choco Reels was 1-1 with a win against Cabin Crashers week 2 and Rise of Atlantis was 0-2 but perhaps undervalued as both losses came in close matches against teams still undefeated heading into this week. Choco Reels dropped a full screen 37x in game 2 for over $37,000 to record the very biggest hit in ISL thus far. Unfortunately for them, it's sandwiched between 2 sub 0.1x buys and they fall pretty easily 3-1 to Rise of Atlantis, who gets on the board at 1-2 and secures 7 fantasy points with a buy over 1x in game 1. Choco gets a solid 4 points in a loss with the big hit over 10x, but the 2 buys under 0.1 limit the upside. Man, you have to go back and watch the VODs or the clips of this hit. It's absolutely insane. Systems almost calls it in as he talks about the value that you can get with the multi that's been built with 2 wiles in the first 2 reels that connect, and bam, it hits and we have a new ISL record. Matchup number 7 had to follow that. It had Balatra's entry Crystal's Digger at 1-1 squaring off against the undefeated Gates of Olympus from Pragmatic. Crystal Digger started out with a commanding 2 wins, making it look like another sweep might be in the cards. Both were over 1x and Gates barely avoided losing points. Game 3 is much closer, but Crystal pulls off the win for the sweep. Couple that with the 2 buys over 1x and they had a massive 10 fantasy point day and moved to 2-1 on the year. Gates has a hugely disappointing -1 fantasy points with the sweep and no big buys, and they fall to 2-1 and get knocked from the ranks of the undefeated. On to matchup number 8, where Penny Pelican from B Gaming was hoping to get on track after an abysmal 0-2 start against Super Mega Monsters from Massive Studios, who was hoping to keep things rolling after a win last week to get to 1-1. And Penny Pelican just can't get it done. Where have the Pelicans gone? Do Pelicans migrate? Maybe that's where they are. We need to get them back to wherever they are in this game because they get swept pretty easily by Super Mega Monsters. The Pelican matches the potato with -1.5 fantasy points en route to the 0-3 record record, while Super Mega Monsters collects the 8 points with the sweep and moves to 2-1. Matchup number 9 put ISL disappointment Retro Tapes from Push Gaming up against early Cinderella Dragonfall from Blueprint. Retro Tapes had only won one game in its 0-2 start with a league worst 0.19 average X, while Dragonfall had only lost 2 games en route to a 2-0 record, leading Dragonfall to be what I would assume was a very heavy pick rate in fantasy this week. Dragonfall almost pays those fantasy managers off with a huge win as they jumped out to a 2-0 lead, including a massive hit for over 10x in buy 2. Eyeing the sweep, Dragonfall lets up and Retro Tape pulls off 2 in a row to get us to only our second Game 5 of the week up to this point. Dragonfall started Game 5 slowly but came through to improve to 3-0 with a huge last spin to pull out the big win and lock up 10 fantasy points, with 6 for a win, 4 for a 10x multi-game. Retro Tapes comes to life a little bit despite falling to 0-3 with a respectable 2 fantasy points with the 2 match wins and no negative points this week, which is an improvement for them. Matchup number 10 saw a push game that has been performing better in Razor Shark at 1-1, hoping not to let Cat Clans 2 Mad Cats from Games Global get on the board after an 0-2 start. Cat Clans got out to a quick 2-game lead, bagging a 1.28 in Game 1 for an extra fantasy point. Sharky rolled back with 2 wins in a row of their own, including a 2.29 in Game 3 for an extra point of their own. The decisive Game 5 saw the Cat Clan go crazy with a 4.7x to end all doubt and get to 1-2 with a very nice 9 fantasy points with a 1x, 3x, and the win. And Razor Return ended up with 3 points with the 2 wins and 1 game over 1x, and unfortunately, they fall to 1-2. Matchup number 11 was a someone's gotta win match, as we had 2 previously winless slots battling in King Kobe from Booming Games versus Hoarders from No Limit City, who was actually the last slot left in the ISL that had not even won a single game thus far. And with a 1.31 Game 1, the losing streak went to 7 games for Hoarders, who then stormed back with their first win of the year on a putrid 0.13x. Games 3 saw Hoarders lose on a 1.37 to a big 2.29 from Kobe, and things looked bleak for No Limit City. Hoarders rebounded with a big 2.35x in Game 4 to give us the 3rd consecutive Game 5 of the week where they came through in the clutch on a big setup to win with 1.94 against a very respectable 1.21 from King Kobe, who falls to 0-3 but picks up a very hefty 5 points in the loss with 2 game wins and 3 matches over 1x, while Hoarders grabs a nice 9 points with the win and 3 buys over 1x. Moving on to matchup number 12, yet another huge mismatch on paper as we get week 2 super slot and current 1-game fantasy leader Hip Hop Pop at 2-0 from Avatar UX against 0-2 Bonanza Billion from B Gaming. A lot of these mismatches on the slate for week 3, and Hip Hop took advantage, jumping out to a 2-0 lead, weathering a 1-game comeback attempt and winning on a 3-1 while adding a 1.55x in Game 2 for an additional fantasy point to nudge their weekly total to 7, which is good, but a long way from their week 2 record-setting 13 points. Bonanza Billion continues the B Gaming woes, falling to 0-3 and getting only 1.5 fantasy points with a win, a 1x, but unfortunately a sub 0.1x as well. Matchup number 3, the lucky number 13, saw Boom Boom Gold from 3 Oaks Gaming look to improve on their 1-1 record while blasting Red Tiger's Bloodsuckers Megaways from the ranks of the undefeated. But despite Bloodsuckers Megaways leaving the door wide open in games 1 and 4 with totals under 0.5x, Boom Boom just fizzles out and falls to 1-2 with the 3-1 loss, and 2 fantasy points for their 1 win and a 1x buy is nothing explosive to say the least. Bloodsuckers, on the other hand, stays undefeated and adds 7 big fantasy points to the bank with the win and the profit buy in Game 3. Matchup 14 gave us the most consistent slot up until this time in the ISL, with Hammer of Vulcan from Quickspin taking on Relaxed Gaming's Sloth Tumble. Both slots were 1-1 heading into this matchup, but Hammer Time had yet to post a buy under 1x in its 7 games, making this one for the ages that lived up to the hype. No slot could win 2 games in a row in this back and forth battle through 4 games, with only the Sloth's 1.44 to 0.19 victory in Game 4 being really decisive. But the Hammer fizzled out in buy 5, and the Sloth does just enough to take home the win, moving them to 2-1 and dropping Hammer Time to 1-2. Sloth got 7 points with the victory and 1 profitable buy, while Vulcan gets a measly 2 with their win and single buy over 1x as well. Matchup number 15, the penultimate matchup, was Sheep Gone Wild from Red Tiger with a super close 1-1 record against early shocking member of the 2 2-0 club, Wild Coyote Megaways from One Touch, who hope to prove that they're for real as an ISL contender, and their luck very nearly held as we had our 6th and final 5-game match of the week after having only 3 of them in week 2 and a crazy 9 in week 1. This was back and forth with Sheep looking like kebab after putting up a profit in 2 of the first 3 games, but still being down 2-1. They finish a really strong performance with 4 of 5 buys, being 0.9x or higher, and that's just something the Coyote couldn't keep up with. All these profits lead to a healthy 9 fantasy points from Sheep Gone Wild, while Wild Coyote only took 2.5 home with 2 wins, a 1x, and a sub 0.1x as well. Matchup number 16 is the last one of the week. It gives us Grand Heist feature buy, also from One Touch. Upset winner last week against Sweet Bonanza, against No Limit City's 2-0 entry, Mental. And here we got our 5th sweep of the week after having 7 sweeps last week and just 2 week 1. It was Grand Heist sweeping Mental with only the 3rd game even being close, as Grand Heist put up a robust 2.12 and 2.3x rounds 1 and 2 and had plenty left in game 3 to move to 2-1 and announce themselves as contenders in the first quarter of season 1 here in the ISL. A week leading 10 fantasy points comes with the sweep and 2 buys over 1x, while Mental drops to 2-1 as well, but loses a fantasy point by getting swept and not getting any bonus points for big returns. Week 3 had some fantasy studs, but it wasn't like what we've seen in the first 2 weeks. We only had 3 slots hitting double digits and they all hit exactly 10 points. Dragonfall, Crystals, Diggers, and Grand Heist. Diggers and Heist got there with sweeps paired with 2 rounds over 1x, while Dragonfall got there the hard way with the match win plus a buy over 10x. We did have 3 slots having the dishonor of tying this week as our fantasy duds. They all scored a negative 1.5 points. Penny Pelican, Dr. Rock, and Royal Potato all did it the same way. They got swept and threw in a sub 0.1x for some icing on their dung cake. Some surprising names at the top of the season-long fantasy list, with the 3-0 teams having a big advantage early given the extra points they're going to get for the wins. First of all, Dragonfall leads the way with 29.5 points, with a 7.5, a 12, and a 10 in weeks 1, 2, and 3. They've gotten there with a 3-0 match record, 4 1x's, 1 3x, 1 10x, 1 sweep, and only a half a point lost with 1 buy under 0.1x. Your early fantasy leader is Dragonfall. Hip Hop Pop is in second, right behind with 27 points so far, scoring 7, 13, and 7 the first 3 weeks. They're also 3-0. They have 3 1x's, a 10x, and a sweep to their name. There's a bit of a drop off to number 3 in the standings, where Kodiak Kingdom checks in with 24 points. They have a 9, a 6, and an 8 point performance across their 3-0 start. They have a 1x, a 3x, and a sweep in the process, in addition to their match wins. Just like the season-long fantasy leaders are dominated by the 3-0 squads, the fantasy bottom of the barrel comes from the ranks of the winless slots. Penny Pelican has netted a grand total of 0 points across 3 games, with awful 2.5, -1, and -1.5 totals put on the board. They put themselves in that hole by only having 1 buy over 1x, 2 game wins, 2 buys under 0.1x, and 2 sweep losses. Yuck. Cabin Crashers is on the rise, totaling 0.5 points in 3 games, scoring -1.5, 0, and 2 points. They've won 3 games while losing 9, have 1 profitable buy, 3 buys under 0.1x, and unfortunately a full 0x to their record. Retro Tapes rounds out the bottom feeders with their whopping 1 point total in 3 weeks. They have 3 game wins but 2 buys under 0.1x and a sweep. Their highest multi so far has been 0.49x, which is a full 0.65x worse than the next closest, Big Bamboo, making Retro Tapes the only game not to post a profitable buy in the first 3 weeks of the ISL. There's only 3 undefeated slots left in the ASC after week 3, with Rich Raptors, Bloodsuckers, and Kodiak Kingdom all out to hot starts, but as we know, it's very, very early, and any of these slots, especially these 2-1s, have a chance to make a run. Over in the ISC, we're down to 2 undefeated teams left, and they're both the top 2 in fantasy. Hip Hop Pop and Dragonfall are beating back the horde of teams at 2-1 and hope to continue their hot starts next week. Taking a quick look at the Providers Cup, Avatar UX is dominating the competition early with their lone entrant Hip Hop Pop, who is 3-0 in matches, 9-2 in games, and is averaging an astounding 9 fantasy points per game. Phantasma and Rich Raptors are in a very similar boat with a 3-0 match record, a 9-4 game record, and 7.2 fantasy points per match. Phantasma and Rich Raptors are in a very similar boat with a 3-0 match record, 9-4 game record, and 7.2 fantasy points per match as an average. Red Tiger is the top provider with multiple slots, as both Bloodsuckers, Megaways, and Sheep Gone Wild have performed well in the early days. 5-1 in matches, 17-10 in games, and 7 fantasy points is nothing to sneeze at, that's for sure. Week 3 really did have it all. A good mix of sweeps and 5-game battles, drama and controversy settled by VOD review, upsets, new arrivals on the scene, and early slots emerging as favorites, which only makes me more excited for a massive week next week. Just 3 of the great matchups that I'm looking forward to. First of all, Sweet Bonanza looking to get back on track after 2 straight losses as they take on the undefeated Bloodsuckers Megaways. Also, there's 2 massive early favorites from the ASC East squaring off as Silverback Multiplier Mountain faces Rich Raptors. And finally, in the very last match of the week, undefeated Kodiak Kingdom takes on 2-1 Mental in what should be an epic battle. I can't wait to see what happens next. Thank you for joining me on this edition of the ISL Report. Head over to ISL.bet now and get those picks and fantasy squads locked in, and tune in on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the next edition of the greatest event in slot history.